Hey there, thanks for watching. My name is Christiana and my channel is A Well-Behaved Wallet, where my mission is to use a well-behaved wallet to help me love the life I have while building a life of my dreams. Today is Sunday, May 5th, and as it's Sunday, I thought I would do just kind of a sit-down story time, kind of on my history with God and the church as it's Sunday. So those of you who have been watching me know that tithing is very important in my budget, and that's kind of been an issue um, that I feel very strongly about. It is an issue that I feel very strongly about. But I thought I would kind of give you the backstory on my history with church. My relationship with God, to kind of let you know why that is so important to me and hear a little bit about the journey that I've gone on that has led me to this place where I am currently. So the reason why I'm actually looking for a quote because the quote that I identify with most strongly is actually from Rabindranath Tagore, and it was incorrectly attributed to Gandhi, and that quote is something along the lines of, "You Christians are nothing like your Christ." The idea being that sometimes the worst part of church is the people in it, and that said, for me, being a follower of Christ, it's impossible to do that aside from the church. So that it's kind of like a catch-22. Again, sometimes Christians can be the most critical, judgmental, awful people ever. Saying that as someone who identifies as a follower of Christ. So I say that to kind of disclaim and say that I have very little, I just try to be very pragmatic about the church as an institution. It's made up of sinners. That's how it is. So that's just kind of like a disclaimer over my story. So I'll start kind of at the beginning. I was a very church child. My mother has to this day a very, very strong faith, and that involved going to church every Sunday. And I think my father appreciated that, so he would support her and go with us. And I remember good and bad. We had great times. I liked Sunday school when we were in Bethesda. It was a huge church. We went to Fourth Presbyterian, and I'm going to name names in this video, so get ready. Fourth Presbyterian in downtown Bethesda. It's huge, no parking lot. Parking was terrible. And the minister was this big Scottish guy, like from Scotland, and he would wear like full-on robes for Sunday morning. And I just remember it was a very, very like holy experience, like as if God himself was speaking through the minister, which was actually happening. So I remember good things there. And there were just tons of kids, and I remember interacting and being challenged and having fun. I also remember there was like a balcony, and I remember sitting in that balcony, and like I was maybe 4 at the time, a typical, rambunctious 4-year-old, I made a paper airplane and flew the paper airplane from the balcony down to the main sanctuary. And my father was sitting next to me, and I had never seen him get so mad. Like, it was like one of those like white heat moments. Like, he like took me outside into the hallway, and like I have never been so terrified of my father as I was in that moment. So there were good times. There were fun times, and there were not so fun times. So we moved from Bethesda, Maryland when I was 6. We came up here to New Jersey, and it was kind of tough to find a church to settle into because Fourth Pres had been such a big part of our lives. It was tough to find something to replicate that up here. And so we kind of visited different churches, and the one that we stayed at was called Grace Baptist Church in Nanuet, New York, and it was fairly conservative. The title conservative was actually in the title, the word conservative. But a same kind of similar feeling of like really loving, learning, and exploring, and feeling like it was safe to challenge what I was hearing in the sermon and to interact with it. I remember especially that in the church I was treated. That was the first place, and I remember the first person that spoke to me not as like a 10 or 11-year-old or 12-year-old at the time, but he spoke to me as an adult, like as a fully functioning human being. And his name is Jim Kingsland, and he was really amazing. And he has a wife and 3 kids. Actually passed away a couple years ago from complications from diabetes. But he was one of the first people that introduced me to reading and to reading about the church, because he would just talk to me about what he was reading. Like, we'd all get together, like a bunch of all different families, and like he'd be talking, and like I would like chime in and ask questions, and like he would answer my questions, and I just thought that was so neat. And I remember really feeling like my opinion and my thoughts had value, and that was such a neat feeling, and I loved feeling that way at that church. That didn't last long. So we were there for maybe 3 years, and then the senior pastor left, and then the youth pastor left, and then it all kind of like fell apart from there. And I will say also about the youth pastor, he he was incredible, amazing, really, really, really strong and committed. And the thing with them was, so my parents had gone through divorce at that point, and his parents had divorced. So as a result, he and his wife really, really, really worked hard on their marriage, and you could see the work and the way that their partnership was really strong, and that made a big impression on me. I remember sitting down at their dinner table with the whole family. It was like mom, dad, and their three kids, and I was like, "What is this? Like, what is going on here? Like, what do you mean everyone sits down for dinner? Like, what is this?" And like he would like enforce certain like codes of conduct and behavior in a very healthy, very, adult, like, you don't behave like that to his kid. And I was like, whoa, like, what is that? It felt weird, but I knew in my spirit that was right and that was healthy. I was like, this is a healthy family and it feels weird. So I kind of knew that, but I also appreciated that because he and a lot of different people and different men, especially in the church, came after me and were like, would check in. They'd be like, Christiana, how are you? Are you doing this? Like, we'd love to have you come out on Friday. And I'd be like, well, I don't like that. I think, that's stupid. That's silly. I don't like these people. And they'd be like, it's okay. Just come anyway. And I'm like, I don't really want to. And they were so persistent in a very loving way that really stuck with me. And I felt that in my soul. And I feel like I was kind of made to feel that sense of inclusion, despite having issues, despite feeling, I don't say separate, but despite all that, having that feeling of like, just come anyway. And I really, really, that really resonated with me. So I was kind of in junior high going into high school, when the youth pastor left and the senior pastor left and that church kind of broke apart. And I will tell you, it was over money, because there was a donor there that felt like because he gave a certain amount of money, he had the right to make decisions and to have a say and have to have people do what he said. And because people didn't want to listen to him, or because, we like split down the middle. And that was heartbreaking because I could see it even as a 12-year-old. I'm like, what is this? And I remember it was like the men and the women, not men and women, but I remember one of the women just standing up and saying, we are not one in Christ. We are not one in love. And being like, wow, like, what is going on here? And why is this such a big, like, why is this being torn apart? Because that church was also so diverse, economically, socially, racially, ethnically, just across all different bounds. We had Haitian, Indian, Black, African American, Asian, Pacific Island, I mean, like, everything. People from very, very Scandinavian, and then my family. So that church, I kind of set the blueprint and the template for me. So that was Grace Baptist in Nanuet, and then as it broke apart, we kind of looked for different places and to go. And so, through high school, I didn't really have a church, and that was tough because high school was a really, really challenging time for me because my father had just left and my mom needed support and really wasn't finding it. And I just remember being upset that Grace had broken apart, and sad that we couldn't find anywhere else and the demographics in our area have changed since then. But at the time, it was a very, very white neighborhood, and my mom is very white, like blonde hair, blue eyed at the time, and then my sister and I are dark haired, dark eyed, like we're half Asian. And I remember going to a church and sitting down. Or like it was like a church function at a local church that we were trying, and we were at a dinner, and my mom introduced us to a woman that she'd been talking to. She's like, "Oh, these are my daughters," and the woman was like, "Oh, they're Asian," and I'm like, at the time it was like, thinking about it, I'm like, oh, it wasn't that big. Yeah, we are. And your point? Yeah. Hey, nice to meet you. My name's Christiana, But at the time, it just felt like her saying, oh, you don't belong here. You don't belong. Like, you don't belong with her. Because there were a lot of other issues going on. And it just felt so, that was called out. Like, oh, we're Asian. And guess what? Our dad walked out on us. Like that's kind of how that felt. And it just was so, negative and destructive. I just, the attitude and the fact that it wasn't, that I didn't feel like there were other people that looked like me or that I fit in was kind of the way that it felt. I'll also say that like it was tough for me to go to Sunday schools because it's cool classes with the local churches, because it felt like there wasn't that sense of like, hey, you can interact with this, you can have a dialogue, you can like question, you can challenge, engage with the scripture reading. It was more like, this is what it is, and this is what it is, and then this is what it is. And then it just felt very restricted. And so it was tough to find a home to settle into. So that was high school. And then college rolled around, and I, from my college application story, which I didn't finish, but I ended up, yeah, I did. I ended up going to a Christian college, which is something that I swore that I would never do because I felt it was very narrow-minded, and it was like the quality of education wasn't the greatest, and I was just really disappointed with the thought of it. But when it happened, it ended up being amazing, and it was like everything I had looked for, because in my mind, this was like, all right, we're starting from ground zero and we're going to build up. Like this is the worst possible scenario. Okay, now we just build up from that. So I really was like, I tried things I'd never tried academically. I didn't maybe apply myself so well academically, but I think socially it was good for me as well, because there were other people that that were able to interact with faith in a way, and that were willing to interact with me and faith in a way that was very, I would say progressive, but very welcoming and inclusive. So those 4 years were really transformative. And again, I met professors and influences and mentors, and I'll say male mentors, men that were willing to interact with me in a very, I don't want to say, it's not a paternal way, but a very like, in a mentorship. Like it was I felt very mentored and very looked after in that college. So that was those 4 years, and I was kind of hopping around to different churches in the area. I didn't really stick with one, and that was kind of a theme. I would go to different churches here and there, trying to find one. My mom was the same, kind of didn't really have one church that she kept going to during those years. So what happened during that time of like searching was maybe 4 years. And things were upheaving. I was with my work. I had left one job and was looking for the next step. I was thinking that I was going to go overseas. As I was planning to go overseas, I happened to wander into a local Presbyterian church called Redeemer Presbyterian, because I'd heard about this whole Redeemer movement in the city, and there was one that was local to us in New Jersey, and I was like, oh, let me check it out. So I checked it out. Walked in, and one of the names I saw on the bulletin sounded familiar. I was like, where do I know that name from? And I looked at his bio, and I was like, he grew up in Nanuet, New York, and went to Grace Baptist. And I was like, are you kidding? That's where I know that name from. So the assistant pastor at this church, Grace Redeemer, actually went to that church, Grace Baptist, that I grew up in. I was like, oh my goodness. So this was like amazing to meet him. And I was like, do you remember me? And he totally remembered me. And interesting coincidence, my mom had also led the young adults group that he met his wife at, and she was kind of, I don't say instrumental, but she was a part of their getting together and their like premarital like relationship and all of that. So that was actually such a neat coincidence to like see this guy in the midst of this searching, and I was like, oh my goodness. And it just so happened that he, as assistant pastor in this Redeemer Presbyterian, was getting ready to go out and start his own church in Suffern, New York. That church that he started, to Rockland County as opposed to Bergen County, that church that he started was called All Souls Community Church, and I've been going to that church for the past 11 years. So that brings us to sort of the past 10 years, and I have been going to that church on and off pretty fairly consistently over those 10 years. So that's kind of my growing up to present day. And now that I'm talking about this, I'm realizing this is going on forever, but I love talking about this and I love sharing this because it has not been an easy road. So I'm going to actually end this here, and I'm going to make a part 2 to talk about my time in the church that I'm at right now, and why it's sort of a victory that I've been there for 10 years, and how that's probably the most assuring, challenging, wonderful, terrible, awful, magnificent relationship that I've had significantly in my adult years. So if you're stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for watching.